Hiya. Right, where we left off last time was we looked at the link between marginal and total product. What we're going to do this time is look at the remainder of the product curves and then review what we did on costs on Friday. So where we'd left off was we'd left with the idea that in the short run we know there's at least one fixed factor of production, and therefore if that's the number of workers. I hate this. I can never get it to line up properly. If that's the number of workers, and that's units of output, then what we said is that as we employ a number of workers, total output rises, because obviously, well, I mean, it eventually might not, but generally total output rises. The question is, what rate does it rise at? And that's what marginal product measures. So what we said is that to start with, there's the possibility of teamwork as we add first, second, third, fourth workers. And therefore, the first worker adds, say, 10, the second one adds another 12, the third one adds another 14. And that was when total product was rising more quickly. Here we have diminishing returns, because each worker is still adding, but they're adding less than the one before. And then finally, after here, we have negative returns, and workers are literally getting in the way and reducing total output. But what we also said is important is we want to know about average product. And the reason we want to know about that is that's effectively output per worker and is a measure of overall efficiency. Marginal product tells you about the last worker, but what we want to know is really taking all workers together, what is the overall level of productivity. And we can derive that from get that from our marginal product curve. So if we have one worker, then that worker added 10, so by definition the average product is 10. If we employ a second worker, that one seems to have added 12. So the average product is 10 for the first plus 12 for the second, divided by 2, that's 11. Third one, there they are, they add, say, 40. 10 plus 12 plus 14, that's 36, divided by 3 is 12. So what's happening is that the average product is going up. And if you think about the relationship between marginals and averages, then essentially, suppose you're playing a game and you've got an average of, I don't know, you're playing basketball or something, you've got an average of, 20 points a game. All that determines whether your average goes up or down is in the next game, is the average above, is the next game, the marginal, is it above your current average or below it? Something went wrong there, I think it didn't like the lighting or something. So what we can see is that here, your next one is above the current average, therefore your average goes up. This is the interesting bit, because although, it's like with the height thing, although the marginals are going down, the average still goes up, because the next one is above the current average. And if we keep going, here the marginal is above the average, so the average goes up. Here the marginal is above the average, so the average goes up. Right up until there, when after that point, the marginal is now below the average, so the average will come down. And what that means is that if the marginal is above the average goes up. If the marginal is below the average goes down. And what that means is that that's the maximum point of the average product curve. So that was what we started with. Yeah. What we then said is, well, okay, what's the point of all of this? And we said that our overarching goal is to create a model. Of our firm. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah. And we said that what we're going to be assuming is that firms want to maximise profits, at least for now. So therefore, we need to understand about revenue and costs. So what we said is, well, okay, let's have a think about costs. And we looked at various businesses, we looked at Dover Brooks and so on. And we said that in the short run, particularly, we can classify our costs into two types. On the one hand, there are fixed costs, and on the other hand, there are variable costs. And what we said is that these definitions, these phrases are slightly misleading in the sense that fixed costs aren't necessarily fixed. All it means is they're fixed with respect to output. In other words, if output goes up, these particular types of costs don't. But they can go up with or down with something else. So, for example, we talked about Dover Brooks' heating bill, and we said, well, look, in the winter it's high, in the summer it's low, but it's still a fixed cost because it doesn't vary with the number of students. Whereas variable costs, for example, as you know, we do a lot of work with mini whiteboards. More students means I need more marker pens to write on them. But marker pens cost the same amount of money. They're probably 50p each. But what that means is every extra student, I need to spend another 50p. That makes the cost variable. Not because it varies. I mean, the amount per pen is 50p. It's just that if I have one student, I need one pen. If I have two students, I need 2 pens, which is £1. 3 students, I need 3 pens, which is £1.50, and so on. So variable cost, rises in total as output rises. And we then looked at, certain types of businesses. In particular, we said, well, what are the implications of that? We said if you've got a lot of fixed costs, like an airline, then that creates, that creates opportunities for you. Because what we said is that, the goals of airlines, because all their costs are fixed, is they want to fly full. Because it doesn't really matter how many passengers you got, the cost of the pilot, the cost actually of the aviation fuel and so on is actually the same. So we said, how do they do that? What they do is they do a variety of things. So one of the things they do is dynamic pricing. What that means is that the price can vary, in fact, as often as day to day. Certainly, if you book a long way in advance, the flight will be very cheap. If you book at the last minute, it might or might not be cheap. It depends on how many seats they've got left. And as you know, they also overbook. So they'll book, routinely 5, 10, sometimes 15%, because they know that a number of business travellers who've got flexible tickets aren't going to show. Therefore, to ensure they fly full, they sell more tickets than they've got seats. So what we're saying is that this idea of fixed and variable costs is quite important. So, and what we then said is, well, let's have a look. Let's have a look in a bit more detail then. At fixed and variable costs. And we started by having a look at fixed costs. And we said, well, okay, let's suppose that's output and that's costs in pounds. So it's just following the usual thing like supply and demand. Output goes along there, costs are there. And we said, well, look, for an airline, it doesn't really matter whether you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 or 30 passengers. The cost of the flight is, say, 10,000 quid. My total fixed cost then looks like that. So in total, I'm going to pay 10 grand, in the form of pilot salary and so on. But one of the reasons they want to fly full is what they want to do is they want to spread those fixed costs over a number of units. Because if you've got 1 passenger, well, guess what? The cost per passenger is 10,000 quid. If you've got 2 passengers, immediately the cost per passenger is now only £5,000. 10,000 over 2. If you've got 4 passengers, it's 10,000 over 4, which is 2,500. If you had as many as 10 passengers, it's now 10,000 over 10, it's down to 1,000. So if we can spread our fixed costs over a larger number of units, then what we end up with is a line that looks something like that. And that's average fixed cost, which is just fixed cost per unit. And that's going to be useful because obviously you've got to set a price that's above your unit costs. So from a business perspective, it's quite important to know our unit or our average costs. So that was the relationship between total fixed and average fixed cost. The other thing we said is, well, let's have a look at the way variable costs work. And what we said is, well, look, okay, the key variable cost, one of the most important variable costs, is marginal cost, because that's the extra cost, of an extra unit. Or if you look at it, if you look at a book definition, it's the change in total cost from making one more unit. And what we know is that when a firm has, if this is now units of output again, and this is the cost in pounds, we know that when the firm has increasing returns to the variable factor, when it has increasing returns, every time I employ an extra worker, that worker is more efficient than the one before. Therefore, the cost of the extra units is going down. When we have diminishing returns, when I employ an extra worker, the cost, what's happening is that worker is becoming less and less, each worker is less efficient than the one before because we're running out of space and so on. Therefore, when we employ them, they're not actually very productive, and the cost of the units that they make, the the cost of their extra units is actually increasing. Like that. So we end up with a function that looks a bit, a line that looks a bit like the Nike swoosh. Up to that point, we have increasing returns to the variable factor. After that point, we have diminishing returns to the variable factor. So when we have increasing returns, where each worker is more efficient than the one before, the cost of each extra unit is falling. Beyond point X, each extra worker is less efficient than the one before, so the extra cost, the cost of extra units of output, the cost of extra Lego bricks or something, is starting to rise. So that's marginal cost, and marginal cost is pretty important. And it's important for two main reasons. The first reason that it's important is that it's very helpful for a firm when making output decisions. Because if you think about it, do I want to make and sell this marker pen? What's going to determine that? The answer is, am I going to get more from selling it than it costs me to make? What it costs me to make is my marginal cost. So there's my units. There's my cost. We said that marginal cost looks like that, increasing returns to the factor up to there, diminishing after that. Suppose you can sell at a constant price of 10 quid. How many units are you going to want to sell? Well, I'm going to want to sell this one because I get £10 for it and it costs me an extra £4 to make. And I want to sell that one because I get £10 for it and it costs me an extra £3 to make. And I want to sell that one because I get £10 for it and it costs me an extra £3.25 to make. So in fact, what we're saying is I want to sell all the units where the extra amount of money, which we could call marginal revenue, but effectively at the moment it's just price, is greater than or equal to marginal cost. So each one of these units is adding more to revenue than it does to cost. Each one's adding something. After that point, the extra cost is more than the extra revenue, and therefore your profits will be going down. So profits are going up, 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 and then down, 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 down. So at that point they're maximised. So marginal cost is useful because it helps a firm when making output decisions. The second reason that marginal cost is useful is it gives us an insight into variable costs overall. And we said, suppose we take the extra cost of the first and the extra cost of the second and the extra cost of the third unit, and that's say £7, that's say £6, that's say £8. Then that gives you a total of 21 quid. And the question is, what is that? We said, what are we going to call it? And in class, we suggested that calling it total marginal cost would make a lot of sense. But what we said is that marginal cost is just the cost of making an extra unit. As you make more units, obviously, in total, the costs go up. So effectively, this is a variable cost, because it's saying as output rises, the extra, as output rises, the cost in total goes up as well. If you make 2 pens, it's going to cost you more in total than 1 pen. But what this isn't, is it's not total cost. And the reason is that most firms have some degree of fixed costs as well. And that's not, that's the extra plastic and lid and labour for the first pen, that's the extra plastic and lid for the second pen, that's the extra plastic for the third pen, and so on. But what you're not taking into account is the rent on the factory and the interest and so on. So what we can say is that if you add up all of your marginal costs, so the sum of marginal cost is equal to total variable cost. So if we add up all of our marginal costs, that then is the total variable cost of making 3 units. So that's quite useful to know. So we've got our total fixed costs, and we now know how to get our total variable costs. And the last thing we had to do was to say, well, what's the link between marginal cost here, that's the units, units in like pens or something, that's cost again, that's units in pens. And we know up to here then, what's happening up to here? What we know is that each unit is costing an extra amount that's less than the one before. That one costs an extra 12, extra 10, extra 8, extra 6, extra 4. What that means is that, but nevertheless, it costs more in total to make 3 pens than it does to make 2. Obviously, it's the real world. So what's happening is that costs are rising, but they're rising more slowly. They're going up by 10, up by 8, up by 6, up by 4. So they're rising, but at a slower rate. After here, each one costs more than the one before. It then goes up by another 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It's going to look like that. So where we have increasing returns, then marginal cost falls, total variable cost rises more slowly. where we have here diminishing returns, what's happening is that marginal cost is rising, total variable cost is rising more quickly. And then the last thing we did is we said, well, if that was, I don't know whether we actually did this in the lesson, but I think we did it right at the end. And we said, suppose that's total fixed cost. Well, total cost must be this to the two added together. Yeah, total variable plus total fixed. So your total cost looks like that. And we'll come back to that in the next lesson. I think that's where we'll kick off. And we'll finally get to the bottom of our short run costs. Yeah, we'll get the last set. Hope that's clear. If it's not, come and see me, drop me an email. But I'll see you soon.